Hello guys, how are you all? Welcome to my channel. So, today we are gonna see, what if Naruto married with female Gaara, part 1, subscribe if you enjoy the video, let's start the story. It started right after Tsunade hit her third 60th, or so it was called, birthday. She had been inviting Reed, forcing Naruto to attend council meetings long before that, so Naruto entered the hall and sat in his usual corner prepared for another afternoon of doodling and daydreaming while resisting the childish, that's what Bach-an called them, the first couple times she had to lecture him, urges to retaliate against the discreet glares the council members occasionally sent his way. It wasn't until Tsunade had been talking for a while before he realized that nearly every council member was sneering at him. Straightening from his slump, Naruto glanced at the Hokage and realized she was looking at him too, thankfully, with a much less hostile expression. He blinked. The deceptively Genjutsu blonde raised an eyebrow as silence descended in the musty meeting hall. Well, Naruto. The younger let his face backslide into the familiar goofy grin and he scratched his cheek, feeling the slightly dimpled markings there out of habit. Well, what? The change was instantaneous. Were you even listening, you brat? Ow. It scared him sometimes how that old hag could change so quickly from the kindly and eccentric woman he had named grandmother without knowing if the label fit or not to the scary, murderous, painful personification of rage that always reminded Naruto of the bathhouse women his sensei frequented. As it turned out, Naruto had missed Tsunade's speech announcing her pending re-retirement and her decision to name her successor. Naruto had missed the words he'd been waiting for, striving for so many years. He had been named Rakudame Hokage. At first, Naruto sat through the rest of the meeting in a blind stupor, deaf to the angry protests of the council. The Hokage's words didn't sink into his brain until he was out on the streets, automatically racing to his apartment, and he spent the next week struggling to believe it. However, his lifelong upward battle was far from over. The council spent the next 4 months waging a vicious and relentless battle with the current Hokage. Tsunade met each argument with fortitude, but her intended retirement date was pushed steadily down the calendar, regardless. Naruto was not present in the meeting hall when the council came up with their most insane argument yet. Tsunade, in an attempt to prove her point to the council, had started shackling him with administrative duties. He wasn't exactly sitting at the impressive oak desk in the Hokage suite, but he wasn't doing any of those stupid practice assignments he had sat through so many of with Shizune-chan peering over his shoulder, either. His clones were almost done with all of the B-level papers and about halfway through the A-level ones, all detailing the fine points of trade of non-military items with foreign shinobi villages, when Tsunade barged in, bowling over one clone and making another poof out of existence. As the door banged his rump with enough force to keep going and leave a dent in the wall. "We need to talk," she said. "What kind of stupid requirement is that?" Tsunade sighed and rubbed her temples. "It is law, actually. An old, unused, obsolete law. Why does it matter, huh? Well, it was in use rather recently, actually, if it was never actively acknowledged. After the death of the Yondaime and then the Sandaime, however, people had other things to worry about." Naruto sat down with a huff, but his foot kept tapping rapidly. "This is ridiculous." Tsunade gave him a look, saying she couldn't agree more. They sat quietly for a moment, Naruto mumbling obscenities under his breath and Tsunade glaring into the distance. So Tsunade tapped her desk. "Does anyone have any ideas?" Naruto's head snapped up. "What the hell? Do you really expect me to get married on a whim because the council pulled some stupid old law out of their collective overstuffed asshole? Why don't you just go back to the meeting hall and kick them around till they concede like you always do? This is their stupidest argument yet." Tsunade slumped forward with a sigh and Naruto felt slightly guilty for the dull exhaustion in her eyes. It had been a hard couple months fighting for him, he reminded himself, and the elaborate Kyuubi let him see through when he turned and looking at her out of the corner of his eye, let him see the emaciated, vulnerable woman she really was. "Look brat," Naruto made a point of keeping quiet. He may call her hag, but Tsunade was one of the few people he truly respected. Age requirements, doubts of your skill and integrity. That kind of crap is arbitrary and easily argued away or circumvented with the right paperwork and the well-placed promise to the right political figure. However, the Hokage is not the main legislative body in Konoha, that's what the council's for. "I just signed the papers." Naruto chewed his lip, going over the years of tutelage in the administrative arts he had received in his head. "Can't you veto? Or something?" He winced, he already knew the answer. "The law's already in place." Tsunade shook her head, "and it's even harder to ask for a repeal. The majority of the council is against you." Naruto sniffed indignantly and scuffed the floor with his sandals. The thought struck him. "Hey, wait a minute. Does this mean you have to get married, too? According to this law, you can't be either." Tsunade gave him a small smile for catching the loophole. "That's what I told the council." However, I get exempted from such requirements for being instituted in a time of crisis. Naruto frowned. So, I really have to get married in order to be eligible for Hokage. He fell back into his chair with a thump. Why is it even a law in the first place? The Hokage resisted the urge to roll her eyes at the wine. Well, ever since Konoha was founded, Hokage has been one of the most trying jobs, and that leaves little time for other things, such as finding love. Tsunade ignored the raspberry the blonde blew at the ceiling. The Hokage is the most powerful shinobi in the village, and Konoha would be losing a great potential asset if that very powerful shinobi forgot to procreate. The older blonde was leveled with an unimpressed stare. Yes, Naruto knew what procreating meant. Thanks to his sensei, he knew every possible method of saying sex, including those portrayed with obscure hand signs and foreign languages. I have to get married because they want me to have kids. I would have thought they wouldn't want to have any more Kyuubi brats running around. He snarled. He instantly felt sorry as a painful emotion flashed in the Hokage's eyes. Even Kakashi-sensei still flinched at the mention of the demon. Naruto. So, will you marry me, Bachan? He slipped easily behind the cheerful facade in hopes of lightening the mood after his slip-up. He didn't even bother to dodge the unnaturally powerful fist that connected with his face a split second later. It was certainly a worrying dilemma. Naruto was used to overcoming obstacles with brute force and determination. However, this situation required a delicacy that he was loath to admit may be his political undoing. How could he get around this one? He was reluctant to dump his most recent problem on any of the girls he knew. He respected all of the ones he would even consider spending a day with, much less the rest of his life, too much to want to do that to them. If nothing else, Naruto was an idealist, and romance was one of those dreams he held close, right next to being Hokage. Besides, there weren't any girls he knew whom he felt he could provide the loving relationship they deserved. He had gotten over Sakura years ago, and though he knew she would drop everything to help him achieve his dreams, he knew he could not ask her. Their relationship had been painfully distant and cordial for years. Filling one's first crush, traitor or not, tended to put a damper on even the heartiest of friendships. Then there was, well, he couldn't think of anyone. He knew girls, sure, but not any of the sort of personal terms this required. Naruto scowled down at his cooling ramen. He didn't need to be reminded of the pathetic state of his love life. It was kind of hard to find that special someone when not only were you busy almost constantly with political aspirations, but also when most potential mates hated you before they even met you. Pork. Small, please. Naruto tensed at the concise words and knew instantly to whom they belonged. He was smiling before he even turned to greet his sneaky little friend. Oi. Are you ever going to get past the creep and pound stage? You know we're way past that. It was a running joke between the two, even though the Redeed never seemed to get it. Gaara, as soon as he had gotten wind of the news, had rushed his entire Sandy posse to Konoha to witness Naruto's swearing-in, only to discover the council had postponed the ceremony. Again. And again. And again. His presence was one thing to be thankful for, though the stoic Redeed wasn't much for conversation. He was certainly a comfort at his side, silently and emotionlessly offering support in that ever-enigmatic Gaara way, as Naruto struggled through the final battle for his childhood dream. What did they say today? Gaara's eyes narrowed, and Naruto took comfort in that the suspicious glare was not for him. Gaara may have the social skills of a retarded rock, but Naruto always appreciated Gaara's ability to understand him without the help of words. No one else could decipher him that easily, no matter how well they claimed they knew him. One needed to have lived through what the Jinchuriki had to understand the labyrinthine personality of one, for no sympathetic mind was great enough to conjure what it was like. And Naruto always smiled at that, no matter how sad he really was. The council pulled out a stupid old law, and Bachan can't shoot it down this time. I have to get married to be eligible for Hokage. Gaara frowned, and he glared at the small bowl of steaming broth as it was set in front of him. Naruto gestured for his next helping as he continued. And I would think they wouldn't want him to stop, remembering the reaction he had gotten from Tsunade in saying those words. Bitterness did not fit the ever-cheerful Uzumaki Naruto. Any more demon brats running around? Gaara finished for him with a smirk. Naruto smiled back ruefully. The Redeed nodded, shutting his eyes briefly. There is also a law like that in my village. Naruto still. Gaara was a secretive person, to be sure, but could he really have missed something like that for so many years? You're not married, are you? Gaara glared at him, berating him for his loudness. No. Naruto sighed in relief. He couldn't imagine Gaara with a wife to go home to. Such a blow to his perceived reality might turn the entire thing upside down. Besides, he wasn't sure he could come to terms with the jealousy that flared in his chest at the notion that Gaara might have something that he didn't. Selfish thought it was, some part of Naruto had gotten the idea that Gaara was a constant that could be relied on, someone to stand companionably by his side when his life took a downward turn, and any change to that was a betrayal. Soon the council decided the marriage requirement void due to the dire circumstances surrounding my instatement. Nodding, Naruto added, same thing with Tsunade. Do you think any dire circumstances are in Konoha's future? Gaara allowed Naruto to see the brief twinkle of amusement in his eyes. Orochimaru is dead, his followers scattered to the four corners of the continent, Akatsuki is disbanded, and no inter-village hostilities have been posing a threat lately. The forecast looks relatively peaceful, I'm afraid. Too bad, I coulda used at least a cloud of political disturbance. Chuckled Naruto. Gaara smirked. Well, cloud and mist have seemed rather stormy lately, but the weatherman predicts the disturbance will dissipate when it reaches the Iwa mountain range. Naruto laughed, turning to his new bowl of ramen as the metaphor was wrung dry. Gaara, I think you were a weatherman in a previous life. He grinned as he dug in. He ate the next two bowls with a feeling of peace, grateful for once that Gaara didn't talk much. Do you have anyone in mind? The noodles being shoveled down Naruto's throat nearly choked him. He scowled at the redeed once he had cleared his airway. That's what Bachan asked. Gaara cocked his head curiously, unwilling to let go of the question. Naruto harumphed and slammed his chopsticks down moodily. Did Gaara have to bring this back up just when he had managed to forget it enough to let the silly smile slip back onto his face? No, there isn't anyone I have in mind. I haven't even dated anyone in I don't know how long. Gaara raised his hairless brows as Naruto raised his voice. Naruto couldn't care less if the other restaurant patrons were glaring at them. What about that carrot top from Iowa? Naruto drew in a breath, ready to go on a tirade as Gaara asked the question. He let it out in a whoosh. I wasn't her type, apparently. Naruto frowned, Gaara had been told this already. The blonde from Rain? Too high-strung. That brunette you met in Northern Fire Country? She smelled funny. And had crooked teeth. The redeed you met at the bathhouse? Which one? Both. Gaara. Growled Naruto, you already know all this. It was their best-kept secret that Naruto told Gaara everything. It was much better to talk to a socially retarded rock with good listening skills rather than the ceiling in his apartment, at least. Sakura. Sakura, well, Sakura Naruto sighed. Gaara nodded at the blonde's dejected tone. You have no one at all. Naruto bristled at the painful words, even though they weren't meant to be. Gaara was staring at him when he looked up, and Naruto frowned at the unfamiliar expression in his eyes. The council says you must marry in order to ensure your genes live on in future generations. Stated the redeed, as if summing up an argument. Yes, Naruto was starting to get uneasy, that strange sparkle in those teal eyes foreshadowed disaster, he was sure. You don't need a wife, you need children. Well, wouldn't I need a wife for that? Gaara, I can't just pick up a kid off the street and call it reproduction. Gaara's lips were slowly stretching into that scary half-crazed grin that still scared the shit out of Naruto. You're not suggesting I knock up some random chick, are you? That's sick. And it'll probably cost me the nomination. That's not necessary. Naruto glanced at the redeed askance. Then what the hell are you grinning like that for? You look like you're planning some sort of evil, diabolical plot. Naruto was almost sorry for the speed with which the grin disappeared, leaving Gaara looking almost apologetic. Shukaku. Gaara's fingers brushed his lips as if to make sure the bloodthirsty grin was gone. He shook his head, whether at Naruto's question or in reprimanding the demon in his mind, he didn't know. As I was saying, all you need is a willing body that can produce your progeny. Naruto turned slightly green at the clinical tone with which Gaara spoke. Well yeah, I guess, but not just anyone. And it would be ideal if this body happened to be of at least notable political stature. Conceded Gaara. Naruto had known this, but hadn't even bothered to consider it. His list of girls was short enough, as it was. Did you know the biological definition of a female is? Any individual of a species that produces eggs that can be fertilized by a male of the same species in order to create viable offspring. Thus, provided the right equipment, even a genotypically male individual can be classified as female. Naruto swallowed. He was about to try to lead the conversation off that topic with an off-color comment about transvestites when he noticed the expectant gleam in Gaara's eye. One thing about Gaara is that he was more stubborn than Naruto was. Once he got something into his mind, he would not let go of it, no matter how much Naruto did not want to listen. That's a bit of a stretch, don't you think? I'm sure Hokage-sama would agree with me. He smirked. After all, even a normal human male has at least one ovary, even if it is not functional. Naruto took a deep breath, scanning their surroundings for a distraction with his peripheral vision. Gaara. Demonic chakra can achieve things even the greatest medic nin would fall short on. Their eyes locked, and Naruto knew he was serious. He could feel his skin paling. With a new cloud of dread hanging over his head, Naruto paid for both their meals, sadly leaving half a bowl unfinished and Gaara's untouched, and he dragged the redeed out of the stall and down the street until he came across a suitable alleyway to duck into. "Look, Gaara," he started. "The fact that I can do it is reason enough." Gaara interrupted uncharacteristically. "And if you ask, I'll say yes." Running his hands through his hair anxiously, Naruto took a step back. There was an unspoken agreement between them, and that was to never bring up the accident. Gaara, that night. If nothing else, it proved the possibility. "I can carry, child, and maybe you can, too." "Gaara. If you're saying what I think you're saying." "And that means," Gaara was staring up at him with an earnest urgency rarely seen in those cold jade eyes, "that I fulfill the requirements." Naruto crossed his arms, suddenly feeling angry. "For what? A wife? The law requires marriage, and last time I checked, you need a girl for that." Gaara growled at him, showing off 2 rows of sharp white teeth that glistened in the shadowed alley. "That's what I've been saying this entire time." Naruto snorted. "What? That just because you're a freak of nature, that makes you a girl? I wouldn't expect that kind of stupid logic from you." Gaara recoiled, snarling at the words, but it was okay. Between them, they both knew it was like the pot calling the kettle black. "Uzumaki," Naruto winced at the return to the aloof formal tone. It had taken him years to wean Gaara off that. "I'm trying to give you an option here. Maybe he shouldn't have been so harsh, after all. We don't even know if what that thing was would have grown into anything, much less something passably human." But the fire had been drained from his voice as Gaara glared at him with eyes he didn't remember hurting so much. "Shukaku says that since it would be of our making, it would take the form we wished it to. Can you really trust what the demon says?" Gaara narrowed his eyes on him. "You were not the one who stopped, grasping for words. You cannot understand. I am the experienced one here and I know Shukaku is not lying now." That was Gaara's way of saying, "Trust me." Naruto looked down and noticed that Gaara was clutching his stomach unconsciously. He remembered the spark he had felt there and how he had destroyed it himself out of fear and shame of what he had done. "You really mean it, don't you?" He shook his head at the craziness of it. Oh well, Gaara was known for that. Gaara didn't even have to nod, it wasn't a question, but he answered regardless. "I am your friend and you helped me achieve my happiness, so I would do anything to return the favor." Naruto's eyes snapped up and cerulean locked with determined teal. "That favor has long been voided. You don't owe me anything." "I owe you everything," rebutted the redeed. Naruto opened his mouth to protest this, but Gaara beat him to it. "And I want to do this." The blonde's eyes bulged. "Want to? Has the Ichibi driven you crazy? You want to throw away everything you've worked for just to be a housewife?" Gaara shrugged one shoulder. "The council instated me with the intent to make me a figurehead, anyway. It's a battle every step of the way just to be able to sign paperwork and frankly, I'm tired of it." Naruto stared suspiciously. "You'd leave Suna? Your siblings?" In typical Gaara fashion, he gave a roundabout answer. "Villagers still mind walking on the other side of the street whenever I walk about town, and besides, Temari spends most of her time here." Naruto wasn't sure he could trust Gaara's nonchalance. "Penkuro? He's the first male born. Kazukiage is his birthright anyway." Naruto stared in disbelief. "Goddammit, you're serious? Have you thought this through?" Gaara glared at him, defying any more protests with his eyes. Naruto chewed his lip pensively. Gaara did not make commitments lightly. If the redeed was willing to make this kind of proposal, then he was damn well planning to go through with it. And Naruto couldn't help but be drawn to the idea. Ever since he'd been old enough to like girls, he'd wanted one of his own to come home to. Gaara, of course, was far from a girl, no matter what he said. But he could still be a person to depend on for company every time he came home from a hard day. Naruto already liked the idea of having Gaara by his side until death do them part. Selfish, it was, but he couldn't help but wanted to hold on to his friend. Gaara had been the best thing he'd had for years, especially after Sasuke's death. "You really want to?" "I don't like to repeat myself." Gaara growled, and Naruto knew that if he expressed himself like a normal person, he'd be howling in exasperation. It probably wasn't the most rational decision he'd ever made, but having Gaara and a chance at Hokage status was too much to pass up. He'd said the words practically before he came to the conclusion. "Will you marry me?" Gaara blinked at him owlishly for a whole minute, more surprised than Naruto was. "Tsubaku no Gaara," repeated Naruto, "will you marry me?" "Ah-chan. You better start preparing for the coronation now." Naruto barged in yelling gleefully at the top of his lungs, dragging a bewildered redeed behind him. "Naruto? You brat, what are you onto now?" The blonde Jinchuriki grinned at his elder, ignoring the dangerously pulsing vein in her forehead, as usual. "I'm getting married." Tsunade choked and Shizune tripped with the pile of scrolls she was carrying. "What? When?" Who? The Hokage jumped out of her seat, spluttering. She hadn't been expecting the blonde would actually go out and find a wife in the span of one afternoon. Naruto thrust into the air, the hand still wrapped around the pale wrist he hadn't let go of yet, nearly pulling the reed attached to it off his feet in the process. Ba-chan. Let me introduce you to my lovely fiancé, Gaara-chan. Gaara yanked his hand free and glared, annoyed by the feminine suffix. Azuki-Ijzama Shizune seemed to be torn between frantically gathering the scrolls she had dropped and frothing at the mouth. Tsunade slapped her forehead. Naruto. You idiot. You can't marry a guy. No. You see, he's a girl. Tsunade stared at the blonde skeptical from between her fingers. She glanced at the reed beside him who was busy glaring at the floor. I don't know what got that idea into your head, Naruto, but I can assure you that Gaara is male. She had served as his physician from time to time, after all. No. Gaara, tell her what you said. Sighing, Gaara crossed his arms. Yes, I'm male, but biologically I can also serve as female. Tsunade blinked. If she had missed the fact that Gaara was transgender, she wasn't the medic nin she always thought she was. You see, the demons do weird things like that. Naruto gestured ecstatically. Due to the nature of inter-demon relationships, Gaara elaborated as Tsunade kept frowning in confusion. Shukaku, the natural omega is. The chick. Gaara sighed, sounding defeated. Well, all demons have the ability to fulfill both biological roles. But I'm more powerful, so I get to wear the pants. The reed glared briefly. Tsunade sat back down slowly. So she looked the reed up and down. How do you know you can reproduce in that way? Gaara glanced at Naruto's askance, the blonde looked very uncomfortable suddenly. Well, he scuffed his feet and scratched his cheek. We've kinda done it before. Tsunade jumped up again, not sure whether she was appalled more by the scandal or the simple possibility. You're not pregnant now, are you? The reed blinked. No, that was a long time ago. And we aborted immediately. She glanced between the two of them, from Naruto's pensiveness to Gaara's unfazed expression. She felt out of the loop. Gaara and Naruto's friendship was a peaceful one that outsiders only glimpsed on the sidelines, and Tsunade doubted from time to time that they were close at all. However, years of observing their interactions, regardless of how infrequent, had hinted at the deep relationship they kept so quiet. But she hadn't known they were that close. You really think you can pull off a marriage between two Jinchuriki just to get a cage position? Yes, Gaara said simply. All you need to do, as the current Hokage and a respected medic nin, is sign the papers to back up the fact that I can bear offspring and therefore be classified as biologically female. Hummed Tsunade. It was crazy enough she was tempted to try it. With Tsunade backing up Gaara's claim, they could circumvent all of the nasty laws against gay marriage. It was unorthodox and would probably be met with resistance from the council and villagers alike, but not impossible. And if it worked, she'd be able to see Naruto fulfilling his dreams and she could finally relax like her aged body told her she should. You're sure there's no one else? Gaara scowled and Naruto shook his head. She chewed her lip and tapped her nails on the desk, looking at Gaara. You're sure that you realize I'll need proof before I make the report, right? Naruto blinked and started fidgeting again. He probably hadn't thought of that. What kind of proof? Gaara frowned. I'm sure I could convince Shukaku to oblige an examination. Tsunade raised an eyebrow. Right, well, in that case what are your plans for juggling the Kazekage position? That was the only real question she had left, bar the many medical ones the doctor in her was shaking in anticipation for. I'm retiring. Huh? Naruto and Tsunade said in unison. And you work from here. Who's going to fill the position? Someone has to run Suna. We already went over this. Gaara growled at Naruto. As it had already been said, he didn't like having to repeat himself. The Suna Council already runs the village on their own, they wouldn't notice I might be happy, even if I were to step down. Tsunade sighed softly. She had been discreetly keeping an eye on the young Kage ever since his unexpected inauguration, after the confusing times of the Sand Sound invasion, and his administration had been riddled with bickering and blatant resistance to anything Gaara tried to do. Tsunade hadn't half the trouble he had, and she was still exhausted after only a couple years. I'm considering naming Kankuro my successor. Does that mean he has to get married, too? Naruto scratched his head viciously, reeling from all the turnabouts the conversation had taken. That's a matter for later consideration. So, moving on, have you thought of the theme for the wedding yet? Ramen. Not food, theme, Naruto. White, perhaps. To keep it simple. Orange. No, Gaara shot that down with a glare. Black and red. But it'd look like a funeral. Precisely, Gaara smirked. If you can have black, I want orange. Tsunade groaned, rubbing the bridge of her nose. She was sure that the future held only headaches and frustrations for her. However, knowing Naruto, despite the pending disaster, he would miraculously end up on top, as usual. This is so much fun. Temari practically bubbled with joy and endless girly bounce. As she had for more than a week now, ever since Gaara had broken the news to her. He had expected something more less flouncy, and maybe a little more thunderous, as was Temari's wont. However, the moment Gaara put Naruto and wedding in the same sentence, it seemed he had pressed that magical girl button. You know, the one that made the opposite sex squeal in fiendishly high pitches, coo over the supposedly adorable, and turn into scarily persuasive fashion gurus. Gaara didn't even know his sister had such a button. Gaara was starting to wonder if the glee would ever wear off before she stuck that way and drove him insane for the rest of his life. Even so, Temari was perhaps the only thing keeping him out of the asylum, as his past week had been more than harrowing. Before now, Gaara had never realized just how much stuff went into planning a wedding. He had seen his sister's stress for himself when she was planning the tying of her own knot with a certain lazy bastard that Gaara still didn't like. Simply because he was the reason Temari spent most of her time in Konoha and not with her lonely little brother, but now that he was actually in her position, Gaara came to the conclusion that his brother-in-law had the right idea, weddings were just troublesome. He couldn't believe it had only been a week since he had made his proposition to Naruto. With so many decisions and paperwork and questions and all this shopping, even though his sister did a lot of it for him, that week felt like an eternity past. Temari. He grunted, holding onto a convenient support beam for dear life. I can't breathe. Didn't you take your sand armor off? His sister continued tugging enthusiastically, ignoring the choking sounds her little brother was making. Yes. Well, then hold it in, for Kami's sake. There. She gave it one last tug and tied off the knot. Oh. You look so cute. Gaara coughed and scrabbled at the ribbons binding his chest. I don't look cute. I look like a demented poof cake and I can't breathe, damn it. If you can talk, you can breathe. Did you gain weight or something? It fit fine a week ago. I couldn't breathe then, either. Gaara gave up with a huff. Temari had effectively trapped him in a cocoon of suffocating scent. He glared at himself in the mirror, which tripled his glower and sent it back at him from 3 different directions. I look ridiculous. Nonsense. You look adorable. I'm sure Naruto will jump you on the spot the second he catches sight of you. Gaara blanched. He still hadn't told his sister the exact reason he had suddenly decided to marry his best friend. So, of course, Temari, being the understanding big sister she was, had decided from the beginning that she would support her little brother's unorthodox relationship, no matter how unexpected it was. Gaara was sure he would appreciate the gesture if he and Naruto actually were well, you know, but really, it just meant his sister was always saying very embarrassing things. In public. Out loud. Honestly, she could be proud of him if she liked, but Gaara wished she didn't have to yell it in the streets. Now, stay still, I'm almost done. Temari batted his hands down, which had risen to defend against her newest attack, guised in the form of prettying him up. No. I am not wearing makeup. However, previous Kazekage or not, Sabaku no Gaara stood no chance against his girl power wielding sister. There. Just a little blush to give you some color. That off. In a last-ditch attempt, Gaara defiantly swatted the makeup out of Temari's hands and onto the floor. Gaara. Temari reprimanded, waving her finger under his nose like an old matron, can't you be more cooperative? This is your big day. You should at least try to look nice for Naruto, nah? I think it'd scare him more than anything if I walked down the aisle looking like a gay whore in a white dress. The redhead growled petulantly. His sister sighed and shook her head. Yo. I came as fast as I ho should. Temari and Gaara turned to the door to find their middle sibling standing there, gaping like a fish. What the hell? Why is Gaara in a wedding dress? Panky, didn't you read the letter? Gaara's getting married. The puppet nin spluttered. Yeah, but I assumed it meant he was marrying a girl. Not that he is the girl. Temari shook her head and asked. However, Gaara knew an escape route when he saw one. He jumped down from the ottoman Temari had placed him on, much like a doll on a podium, as she trussed him up and ran to his brother. Come on, we're already late. Pankiru squealed as he was buffeted aside by voluminous skirts and yanked out the door by the fleeing redhead. Wait. Gaara. You need to put your shoes on. And Kankiru, your tux isn't straight. Naruto felt like he was living a dream. A really weird dream. As in the kind you got from eating stale ramen before falling asleep on the couch while watching late-night TV. The last week had been so surreal, he was wondering if he had imagined it all. He was really going to be Hokage. After so many years of struggle and hope, he could finally say, I am Hokage. Of course, that was a couple more hours into the future after the inauguration and the wedding. It still didn't quite make sense to him, and frankly, he thought both Gaara and Tsunade must be nuts to think they could pull some technical bullcrap out of their asses and call it truth. Because Gaara was not a girl. He wasn't even close to one. But if it worked, Naruto supposed he couldn't argue. He was already looking forward to all the gender benders he could suggest in public to tick Gaara off. Being knocked around by a sand fist would be worth the amusement. His inner prankster was already giggling with delight over the havoc he could wreak on the perceptions of the foreign dignitaries. Naruto stopped short of an evil snicker as the enormous oak doors at the other end of the hall burst open suddenly. The organist scrambled into the traditional wedding song as a crimson-topped bundle of satin ribbon and chiffon came barreling down the aisle, a paintless kankuro in a ruffled tuxedo dragging behind. Naruto's jaw dropped and he let loose an abrupt guffaw. Was that Gaara in a wedding dress? The white monstrosity halted suddenly at the sound and Gaara went from glaring at the red carpet he was following to snarling at the blonde from across the church. Naruto couldn't help it. He dropped to the floor and rolled, howling with laughter. Kankuro, now that he wasn't tripping over the laced and embroidered train behind Gaara, had the presence of mind to properly place Gaara's hand in his crooked elbow and lead them forward again. The Redeed let himself be led, somewhat red-faced and petulant since Naruto was still laughing at him. Kankuro grit his teeth if it weren't so perturbing, considering it was his little brother who was psychopath and Kazekage all in one, he didn't doubt he'd be howling along with Uzumaki. Whispers followed them as they marched down the aisle and Kankuro bristled as more than a few unfriendly words reached his ears. Curious villagers arched their necks to glimpse their passage, clan members scowled, and a few stoic ninjas sat ramrod straight in the pews. If it weren't for the fact that this was such an important event, with the inauguration starting right after the wedding vows, Kankuro didn't doubt the crowd would be far smaller. He turned his gaze forward, where a snickering blonde was just picking himself up off the floor obligingly, as a formerly robed Godin kicked him in the ribs discreetly. Uzumaki Naruto. Truth be told, Kankuro wasn't all that surprised. He just barely saved his little brother from falling on his face as he tripped over his dress on the way up the steps at the end of the aisle. Naruto burst into a new fit of giggles, but was stopped abruptly with a pained yelp as the Hokage's heel came down on his toes. Gaara snarled and nearly ripped the elaborately embroidered hem of his dress in pulling it from underneath his feet so he could stomp the last few steps to the top of the dais. Naruto was grinning, lips twitching in the effort to withhold another obnoxious guffaw as Gaara stomped up to him, growling with teeth bared. Kankuro quickly turned the forgotten veil over his little brother's face, which should have been done before they walked down the red carpet to distract the Redeed from leaping at the blonde and ripping his throat out. Will you, Kankuro, eldest brother of the bride's family, Tsunade started up immediately, catching on to the hostilities about to explode in front of a chapel full of people who didn't need to witness the blood splatter from Ensabaku Saosu. Allow the hand of your sister, Gaara, be given to this man in holy matrimony. Kankuro blanched at the use of the word sister, and Naruto grinned at being called a man. I will. He wasn't sure he was doing it right, as the ceremony was already out of order, and he had missed the rehearsals while in between Suna and Konoha, but he figured he couldn't mess it up much more, anyway. Apparently, it was acceptable, because Naruto reached out and took Gaara's hand from him, and Tsunade jerked her chin to the side, signaling Kankuro stand behind her. Everyone jumped as the chapel doors slammed open again, this time admitting a whole train of people marching down the aisle. Kankuro smirked as Temari came marching purposely down the red carpet, smiling as if nothing was out of place, and the rest of the bridal train trailing behind in leafy greens and feathery peaches. He blinked. No, he wasn't hallucinating. That really was Rock Lee and Mido Guy skipping behind his sister throwing petals onto the unlucky people sitting by the aisle. In horrid leaf green tuxedos. Apparently, flower girls were very hard to come by on short notice. Once she reached them, Temari forced the second more elaborate of the bouquets in her hands on an unwilling Gaara with a smile, but her eyes threatened death if he had opened his mouth to complain. Hey, Naruto spoke over the music being banged out on the organ behind them. Where'd you guys supposed to go before Gaara? Tsunade glared at the continued interruption, but Temari replied with a false sweetness as she moved to stand behind Gaara as head bridesmaid. Well, I guess Gaara-chan was so eager to get married to you, he couldn't wait. Gaara huffed indignantly, making the veil puff out from his face. The Hokage cleared her throat over Naruto's snorts. We are gathered here today, she began, projecting her voice across the hall, to join two people in holy matrimony. Naruto swallowed harshly as all his humor left him while Tsunade droned on with the traditional wedding speech. He suddenly felt like he was missing the irony because there had to be something here that was supposed to make sense. He had been so focused on being Hokage, he had almost forgotten about the ceremony that would precede it. Or, he had chosen to ignore it. Now, standing on the dais with Gaara's hand in his own, and the words that would bind them together buzzing in the background, there was no way to ignore it. Naruto, when he imagined his wedding day, had always placed the faceless girl of his dreams on the dais next to him when he wasn't still entertaining thoughts of Sakura. However, Gaara may have been wearing the dress, and Naruto still had to find out how that particular absurdity had occurred, but he didn't have to be a genius to see that Gaara was quite obviously male. It was purely a political arrangement, Naruto realized sadly, and against his principles of living by the whims of his heart. He had, in his quest for Hokage, given up any prospect of romance, if only for the lifelong companionship of his best friend in return. At least he hoped it would be lifelong. Even if the entire situation seemed obscene, Naruto couldn't bear to imagine any future breaking of their union. Their marriage was trivial at best, but was truly hardly more than an excuse to be closer. For years, Naruto had had to endure months, even years, without Gaara, and was always the sorrier for it, as he knew that if only he could keep his friend nearby, they'd be all the better. Neither of the two, both ostracized and prejudiced against all their lives, were the type to let go of such a precious thing like a friend. It was with a desperate grip of the deprived with which they grasped each other and held their tenuous long-distance relationship together. To Naruto, still young, brash, and untamed, romance was a thing of tomorrow, and that made Gaara all the more important. Therefore, losing Gaara seemed to him the worst-case scenario. Gripped by sudden anxiety, Naruto tried to catch Gaara's eye to reassure himself. However, the Redeed's face was the loathsome shadow of a directionless stare. Naruto was quite sure he was grinding his teeth with the set of his jaw. Gaara's hand was limp between his two larger ones, but Naruto was sure the slick sweat between their skin was not all his own. Gaara was at least as nervous as he was. Naruto managed a small smile as Gaara's eyes finally jumped to his own when he squeezed his fingers gently. He felt at ease as he was rewarded with a softening of the Redeed's expression. You, Uzumaki Naruto, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, in sickness and health, until death do you part. I do, he said automatically, surprised that he hadn't missed his cue and relieved he'd been able to keep his face straight as the Hokage referred to the man in front of him as a woman. That would just never make sense, no matter how many times it was repeated. The Hokage turned to the Redeed. Do you, Sabaku no Gaara, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? She repeated the same oath for him, and then it was time for Gaara to accept it. There was a very long, pregnant silence. People were leaning forward in the pews, wondering if Gaara's voice was too low to hear. But he hadn't answered yet. Naruto was gripped with a sudden fear, and he held Gaara's hand tight, hoping to get a reaction out of him. The Redeed's eyes were unfocused, still held within Naruto's own, and his lips were slightly parted, as if he had forgotten to keep his facial muscles in order. It wasn't until Kankuro coughed loudly into his hand, interrupting the tense silence, that Gaara snapped awake. He gasped deeply, as if he hadn't been breathing. I do, he said. Naruto smiled, and Gaara finally squeezed back. I now pronounce you man and wife. Tsunade smirked. You may kiss the bride. What? Do I have to? On the sidelines, Kankuro slapped his forehead in exasperation. This was the most messed up wedding he had ever attended. And he had already lived through his older sisters. Brat. It's tradition. But. Just do it. Snickers and harsh whispers filled the pews as the scene played out. But he's a he. Naruto. She. Okay, whatever. I never said it. Stop whining and kiss up already. But what if he I dunno, attacks me or something, I mean. Fed up with the nonsense, Gaara ripped the veil from his face with a frustrated growl. Suddenly, Naruto found his face to be much closer to the Psycho Redeeds than he ever considered safe. Shut up, Gaara tugged harder on the lapels of Naruto's tuxedo. And did it. The blonde swallowed. Nose to nose, Gaara's face was a white and black blur, but Naruto imagined that if he could see it properly, it would be very scary. Now, howled the Jinchuriki. Okay. Screwing his eyes up, Naruto tried to convince himself he was about to engage in saliva swapping with a very sexy Redeed, a female one, of course. Except Gaara refused to be anyone but Gaara in his mind's eye. Out of sheer force of will, he managed to tilt forward. The first brush of their lips was like a shock of electricity, and it all went downhill from there. Not expecting the sensation, Gaara gasped, inadvertently opening his mouth for Naruto, who fell forward as Gaara bent backwards, the Redeed's grip on the front of his tuxedo unyielding. Naruto was forced to compensate for the shift in weight, lest they both fall. Out of instinct, he swung his arms around the unbalanced Redeed and lifted. Incidentally, this only completed the mistake Gaara had begun by opening his mouth. Their mouths crushed together, with far more force than the feathery light brush Naruto had originally intended. And in an attempt to make up for the original error of opening it, Gaara closed his mouth. Naruto couldn't help the moan that bubbled up from his throat. Gaara's mouth had trapped his lower lip, and with Gaara's teeth grazing over the intrusion uncertainty and the warm, wet cavern's natural suction, it felt good on the sensitive skin. Recognizing the noise for what it was, Gaara quickly opened his mouth again to release the captive flesh. However, the damage was already done. Naruto, as has already been mentioned, was not exactly well practiced in the act of romance, despite his tutelage under the notorious pervert hermit. The impulsive youth was unused to such pleasing sensations, and now that he'd had it, he wasn't quite ready to give it up again. Gaara squeaked in surprise as his mouth was invaded again, this time intentionally. Naruto groaned as he explored the enticing expanse of Gaara's oral cavity. He lapped at the ridged roof of his mouth, slicked his tongue over his teeth, and prodded Gaara's tongue with his own. Desperately trying to make the redeed repeat the titillating sensations. As for Gaara, his eyes widened to the size of saucers as he realized what was going on. Naruto was kissing him. Not just the brusque chaste kiss between friends in their awkward situation, but the make-out demanding kind of kissing that Gaara observed every time his brother brought home a new girlfriend. He couldn't even begin to wrap his mind around it because Naruto was kissing him and he had never imagined he would experience this particular sequence of events beyond his craziest dreams, and well, he liked it. However, Gaara's enjoyment of the kiss was to be short-lived. As soon as he finally moved to tentatively reciprocate Naruto's ministrations, the blonde seemed to come to his senses. They parted with a jerk. Gaara blinked slowly, lips still parted, disoriented by the loss of sensation. Naruto stared at the confused redeed, a vaguely horror-stricken look in his eyes. Ahem, Tsunade cleared her throat loudly, breaking the spell of silence that had fallen over the chapel during Jinchuriki's lip lock. Gaara startled, suddenly remembering that his world included more than just Naruto, and that they were practically onstage in front of all of Konoha. Temari had both hands over her mouth and was holding back either a giggle or a scream by her constipated expression. Tankuru spoke for the rest of the chapel by looking just plain dumbfounded, with his mouth agape and a disbelieving stare. In the front row, Kakashi coughed repeatedly to hide his perverted chuckles. Naruto? Gaara wondered if he had done something wrong, as the blonde continued to stare at him. You can put me down now. Naruto snapped back to life and dropped the redeed like a sack of potatoes. Sorry. Gaara nearly dropped the rest of the way when his feet hit the floor, but he managed to keep his balance using Naruto's lapels as leverage. He scowled down at the voluminous skirts encasing his legs. He had a new respect for women, to be able to walk in a 100-kilo dress, much less in the high heels Gaara had managed to flee from before Temari forced them on him. They must have thighs of steel. Gaara raised his eyes again, flinching inside as he found the same disbelieving cerulean. Naruto was still staring, and his skin had acquired an unhealthy pasty color. Gaara was afraid that, any moment now, that expression would turn to disgust. Why was he looking at him like that, anyway? It wasn't like Gaara was the one to stick his tongue down his throat. Feeling sorry, and sorry for being sorry, Gaara dropped his hands from Naruto's tuxedo. Tsunade cleared her throat again, and Kakashi seemed to be having a rather violent fit, but that's all the sound there was in the still air of the Konoha chapel. Then the clapping started. Both Jinchuriki turned to blink at the crowd as intermittent applause turned into the thunder of a rounding ovation, complete with catcalls and wolf whistles. Smirking, Tsunade raised her hands to call for silence. Well, she began once the noise had died down. After that display of passion, it is, unfortunately, not yet time to move on to festivities. On cue, the organist started playing a more majestic ballad. It is time that I, the Goddamn Hokage, must step down from my office. To replace me, I have named my successor, whom I believe to possess the greatest will and ability hitherto seen in a Hokage, the Rakudame Hokage Uzumaki Naruto. Apparently in a good mood now, the audience applauded this. Tsunade turned to Naruto. Uzumaki Naruto, will you serve Konoha to the best of your abilities, leading with integrity and strength so that Konohagakure no Sado may flourish? Naruto set his jaw and pushed the memory of the taste of Gaara's mouth from his mind. Yes. As Hokage, will you lead the hidden village of the Leaf according to the constitution written by the Shodaime and strive to uphold the central values of Konoha? Yes. Tsunade smiled vaguely. Uzumaki Naruto, she proclaimed, as two honorary attendants, namely Iruka and Shizune, moved forward to wrap the traditional Hokage shroud around the blonde's shoulders. Rakudame Hokage, you are now the leader of Konohagakure no Sado. You are the motivation for our shinobi, the reassurance for our villagers, and the inspiration by which Konoha prospers. I, Goddamn Hokage, now pass on the responsibility so that you may continue the legacy of Konoha. The hat marked by fire was placed on his head and he turned to face the crowd in a daze. The tears blurring his vision nearly spilled over as the applause rolled over him. Hokage. He raised his left hand and silence fell. His voice trembled. He was Hokage. He was here after so many years. A mixture of joy and sorrow threatened to bubble up his throat. So many battles fought. So many sacrifices were made. Sasuke, you bastard, not being here. Then, hesitant warmth slid over his palm, squeezing gently. Naruto glanced down, where small white fingers surrounded his thicker tan ones. Startled, his eyes jumped up to the reed they belonged to. Gaara met his eyes shyly, looking pensive. The newly made Hokage grinned as the seafoam eyes seemed to soften in his gaze. He squeezed back, rubbing his thumb briefly over Gaara's knuckles as he turned back to the crowd. Uzumaki Naruto, started again, and this time his voice didn't falter. The words rolled off his tongue, ingrained in his memory by Tsunade's fists, Shizune's chastisements, and hours of repeating them to himself into the night. Gaara didn't let go of his hand even after the last words of the inaugural speech left his mouth and the crowd stood from their seats to cheer and clap. In fact, Naruto wouldn't let him let go. His grip was unyielding as he grinned his widest grin down the aisle. People reached out to pat his shoulders and tug at his hand, but Gaara's in his own was a solid reminder to keep smiling and shake each hand shoved at him with equal enthusiasm. Despite the fact that the Redeed was glaring at him by the time they reached the chapel doors and was trying to discreetly pull himself free. Thanks for watching my video, see you next time, till then sayonara.